part, which is formulas. So the formulas are basically a tab in Excel, which greatly simplifies the task for the number of crunching. Crunching in the sense, whatever attributes like the auto sum you are doing, or maybe any of the features you are applying for, wherein you have some functional libraries assigned to, wherein you have some defined names, wherein you have some formula additioning, wherein you have some calculation. So for all these parts, we go to the formula tab. So let's see what all it offers to us. So this is my Excel file. Let me just reclose this one. Okay, now coming back to my Excel file. So this is the section of formula that we have. Now in formulas, the first thing that comes up in our mind is to insert a function. Insert functions basically have like whatever functions you want to insert for. If you want to automatically insert a function in any which ways, like sum, average, if, hyperlink, count, max or minimum, anything of that sort, you can insert it from here. Basically, if you want to enter the sum, you can click on OK, insert, and you can have the numbers and you can sum them up. So how that is doable? Let's see. I want to sum. Let's say my first number is 10 and my second number is 20. And I click OK to see. I get a sum of 10, 20, that is 30. So this is how my insertion works. Okay. Then we have auto sum. Auto sum is basically a feature wherein we do the sum automatically, like wherein we have the summation of the data set, or we can have the average of a data set. Basically for the formulas and all the recently used formulas, we can have an average of a data set, we can have a summation of a data set, we can have all these terms. Then recently used will have all the functions that you have recently used or maybe you are going to use. So whatever the data or whatever the functions you are going to use most of the times, those are the functions that comes under the section of recently used. Okay. Any of the sum, pivot methods, any of the other functions that you work for comes under the sections of recently used. So these are the basic sections that we work for. And these are the sections which are highly recommended also. Then if I talk about financials, so in the financials, we have different parts that cover it all. Like for example, if you want to trim a data set, if you don't want to trim a data set, if you want to have a convolus, if you want to find the duration of any of the data, if you want to see what's the duration of a particular data that we have in place, all these terms or the terminologies can be given as a significant of your having into a functionality. Now, if the next part that we have is a logical. So logical statements simplified as a logical statement that you are providing. For example, if you want to apply any logic to your data set, for example, if you want to have some multiple conditions that should be applied, if you want to have some multiple data sets, if you want to apply, or if you want to have a condition of if and else that you want to signify. So for all of these, we have the condition of logical. Then the next part that we have is that any condition that is satisfied. So that's what we call as a logical in that. Okay. Now the next part that we have is a text. So text is basically whenever you want to change something from a character from any of the different data type to any of the other data type. For example, in this case, I want to change into character. I want to concatenate any of the two things together. I want to basically find the length. I want to basically find the find what is there in the left side, what is there on the right side. I want to specify these things. So then in that case, I'm going to go ahead with these options, wherein I will have the length of the stuffs available. I will have the length of all the things available. For all of these sections, I'll basically go ahead with the length and all. Okay. So that's how I work with my data sets and how I find those lengths and everything in my data set. So this is what we called as for the text. Like if you are looking for a character length, if you want to find out what is on the left side, if you want to find out what is on the right side, then in that case, you will see all these texts coming up and see all these things coming up as well as a data set and as a type of text. Then the next thing that we have is a date time. If you want to enter anything, let's say from a date, you want to find out a month, you want to find out a year, you want to find out net work days, any of these things, then in that scenario, we basically go ahead and use for the date function. We always go ahead and use for the date function in that way. Each and every time. Okay. That is called as your date function. So that is called as your date function. We get in the functionalities and in get the formulas for here. Okay. Now next step that we have is a lookup references. Lookups and references are something which is basically used for looking up the data or for the data sets or something of that sort. Then we use the lookup references and the lookup data set for that purpose. So that is called as a lookup and referencing of the data in or anywhere in the part. Okay. So that is called as a lookup references. Then we have math or triggers. So math or triggers are something wherein you want to put the functionality of math, you want to put the functionality of triggers. And all of them stuff, wherein you look for the math trigger functionalities, you get all the averages, you get all the ceilings and all of these. So these are type of more functions that we have in picture. Okay, so let's look up for some formulas that we can use over here. Let's read through some formulas that we can use. Okay, that we can basically create or we can recreate in that sense. So the first formula that we have is a sum. For example, I want to find the sum of anything. Let's say I have quantity over here and I have price and I have total sales. So for the total sales, I want to find the sum of this. So how I can get the sum? I can just simply write sum and I can just give the total of this column. And I have my sum available. Similarly, for an average, if I want to get the average of anything, then in that case, I can get the average by using this section. Similarly, like you do for the sum, we'll get the average. And here, we'll just select for this and we'll get our average like this way. For total sales, or if you don't want to do for the total sales, let's try it for something else. Let's try the average for a quantity. Then that will be at 11. Or maybe you want to try it for price per unit. Then let's take it for price per unit. And you will get the average. So like this way, it works. Basically, your average, count, formula, everything of that sort works in this way. Okay. And in this way only, it will get handled and your work will be done in this single way itself. So this is the only way where you can handle and you can do your jobs at that point of time. Okay. So these are some of the functionalities of average and functionalities that you use for an average whenever you want to do for an average, whenever you want to go ahead with the average stuff, whenever you want to see that, okay, what's the average that for a column is coming up and all of these stuff. Then the next thing that we come is for the count, wherein we want to count the formulas, like what is the count of any of the columns. So in that case, whenever you want to see for the count of any column or anything of that sort in a purpose, so how we can do that? We can basically do that in a sense of like quantity over here we have, and I want to find the count of it. So in that case, the count will be like I can do a count, and here I can say a count, and from here I can just get my counts over here like this, like a 3 of it, and we can do a count for that purpose. So that's actually for the counting of the formula, where you want to count how many number of records you have in the complete data set. So in that case, you can use a count for that purpose, and it's pretty useful also. Okay. Okay, so let's now get on with the count formula. So as I saw for the count formula is to count the number of records. Then we have subtotal. So subtotal basically helps you to find the total of any of the set or anything. For example, subtotal is basically providing you the total of N1. So basically a sum of anything has got a subtotal. Let's say I say subtotal, then you have different sections. Either you want to go for an average, for a count, for count A, for max, min, whatever it is. So let's say I want to take for the average, and herein I want to take the average of this column. So you will see this average. Now the question comes in, will the average for this column, whenever we are finding it from a normal average formula, will this and this be same? Yes, this and this will be probably same. We can check it also. Let's say if I take the average for this sales, it's 58.55, this and this average, and whereas for this is the different one. Why? Because herein we are subtotaling that average. So whatever the average we are getting from each of them, based on that we are subtotaling it, and based on that section it is becoming that total of the data set. Okay. So these are called as your subtotal. Now then we have modulus. Modulus is pretty easy. Modulus is nothing but modulus is, let's say you want to find a mod of something. For example, what will be the modulus of this one? Like this, your 10. If you want to find the mod of this thing, mod is basically a dividend wherein you want to find what is the modulus of this number, if that is divisible by like completely divisible by 2, or if it is not divisible by 2, then in that case you can find the modulus of it. So how we write the mod? I say the mod and whatever the divisor you want to say for. Let's say if I give it 2, then it will be 0. Why? Because it is completely divisible by 2. But if I give it as 3 or maybe 4, then it will come as 2. Why? Because it is not divisible completely by 4 or something of that sort. That's why it is being given as a modulus. So modulus is basically whenever you are dividing something. So in your Excel, your modulus is a division, basically. Then we have power formulas. So power formulas are basically whenever you want to have a set of powers that you want to set for. For example, let's say for this one, I want to set a power to 3. So 10 to the power of 3 will be 1000. Similarly, 4 to the power of 3 will be 64. 4 into 4 into 4. Right? So it's like a multiple, that how many times you want to multiply something and how many times you want to show for something. For example, if right now I would say power of this to 5. Then it will be 1024. So that's how it happens. Now ceiling. Now ceiling is a formula which is interesting and also quite helpful. So basically what ceiling is all about. Ceiling is basically helps you to find out that whatever data sets you have, whatever the data frequencies you have, whatever the data you have, for that that you can divide your data sets and you can work accordingly. Okay. So basically, whatever data sets you have, whatever data in that case, we basically use that data. Now, how? So let's say we are using the ceiling formula. So ceiling formula is something wherein we actually, the ceiling function is Excel, basically helps you to round about to the nearest possible set to have. So possible use the ceiling function for that. Okay, where we basically use ceiling for that reason, where we round the data set. In this section, we are doing a ceiling. So let's start with the ceiling one. So ceiling is basically whenever you want to get the nearest formula or want to be a part of the nearest formula. Then we go ahead with the ceiling function. So ceiling function basically helps you with having a nearest type of a formula that you want for. For example, let's say if I want to have it for a ceiling function wherein I just want to find the nearest of this number, then what I'm going to do is that I'm going to like add on with a ceiling formula there, wherein I can say that, okay, ceiling, and the number should be this, and let's say nearest to maybe 2 places, I'll get around 36. Similarly, similar to nearest to 3 places or 4 places or something of that sort, then accordingly, I'll get that thing. Okay. Now, similarly, when we have a floor expression or when we have the formula of floor. So how can we do that with the floor? So floor is basically when you have an option in place where it is like floor is basically rounding off it, just simply rounding off. So ceiling was a nearest round off number, whereas floor will be just a simple round off to get the whole number. For example, like in this case, when I said that, okay, floor. So floor basically rounds it down. It will never round it up. Ceiling basically rounds it to up, whereas floor rounds it to down. That's what the formula works for. So if I say round it to 2, it will show you 34. So that means it has round up to 2 places, like that way it works. So basically that is what is your floor formula over here. Then next formula that we have over here is a concatenator. So concatenate is basically concatenating the two words. Let's say I want to combine these two words, hello world and concatenate, to form a combination of a complete word. So how can I do that? I can say concatenate, and I can take this as first text. Then if I want to add a space between them, so I can just in the double quotes give the space, then I can go here, and from here I can take this and I can combine this. So this is something which is called as concatenation. When you want to concatenate 2-3 words together to form a sentence or a complete string of a word, then we basically go ahead with the concatenate formula. Now let's suppose in any which cases I want to find a length of any word. Okay, for example, in this case, I want to find the length. That what is the length of this word? Then I'll get it 5. So basically length is like you just type the length and you get the formula across. Now, the next formula that we have is replace. For example, I want to replace this A110 to B. So how can I do that? I can write replace. I can select my text, which is my old text this. My start number is 1. Number of characters is also 1. And my new text would be, let's say this time it should be C. Okay, so C, this has been changed. Like this way, we can have some changes over here. Now, replace is when I'm replacing something. Basically, from a word, I am replacing to another word. Okay, I'm not replacing the complete sentence. But in case of substitution, I can substitute means I can basically like substitute a word, completely change or substitute a basic word. That is called as a substitution. Okay. So for example, in this case, like I have done that instead of I like, I have given it as instead of I like Excel, I have given it as he like Excel. So therein I am substituting the complete sentence or the complete word in that case. Okay, that is called as a substitution. Okay, so substitution and replace are kind of different with each other. In replace, in replace, basically you are replacing a single word and all that. And in your substitution, you substitute some words. So that can lead to sentence and all of that. Okay. So that's how it works with substitution. Now, there is one more formula in Excel which is where you want to find the words from the left, middle, or from the right. So that's a very important like a formula in it itself. So how we can do that? Let's say left, the text, and you have to give the number of characters. So in this case, this is 5, and you get that. So this is how we work. Now, there is something which is upper, lower, and proper. Upper means when you want to have a word in an uppercase, that means in a capital letter. And lower means when you have to show everything in a lower. And proper means when the first letter will be capital and the next letters will be in the lower letters. So that is called as the formulas for that. Then we have the today function. So in the today function, we need to have a date. Today means the current date, which is today's date I'm going to see. So you just need to add today and it will return you current date, which is today's date. Now from this date, you need to find the day, you need to find the month, you need to find the year, you'll able to get it. Okay. Similarly, for the time that you want to see for, so you can just mention the time and whatever the time you want to see for. Let's say in this case, I would say time, hours is, let's suppose 5, minutes is 20, and seconds is 90. So it's 5:20 a.m. that it will show. Similarly, for hours, it is going to show me the hours, current hours now. What is the hours now? That it's going to show me. Then for the minutes also, it is going to show me like that way. And for the for your seconds also, it is going to show me like that way. Okay. So these are some of the formulas. These are very basic formulas that we have covered, which we cover in that formula. You deal with Excel formulas. You also deal with some of the bugs, some of the errors that happens. Every time whenever we are working with formulas, you will see some common Excel errors that will come up or that you will see across. So what are these common errors that we have? So these common errors are nothing, but these common errors are like hash. When the cell is too narrow to display the results of the formula, then you will get hash. Let's say the number is very huge, which you have entered. So when it will not able to display due to the size constraint, then it will show you hash. So to fix this, make the column width wider and real value will be displayed instead of hash sign. So one of the things to be noticed here is whenever you see hash signs are being displayed, Excel still uses the real value to create the formula of the reference cell. So for example, if you have applied a formula in the reference cell due to any reason, so in that case, you can calculate the formula of this reference cell and you can do it. Then there is a error which is called as hash name. Hash name is something which is used for your cell references in the formula. That is basically when your formula is not correctly implemented or your formula is not correct. Basically, in that cases, we use we get this error basically of reference formula set. For example, like if you have b plus b plus 10 instead of b3 plus 10, then you will have this hash name error. Then for the value, hash value error. So hash value error is basically when you are trying to resolve something, like whenever you are doing a mathematical operations and you are doing a mathematical operation with a text value. So mathematical operation, the rule of applying a mathematical operation is that you can only apply the mathematical operation using a numeric value. So if you are multiplying or dividing, doing all these stuff by two values, which is the numeric, or basically the numeric is multiplying or numeric is adding, or whatever it is doing. So then in that case only you can use the value. Otherwise, apart from that, you can't use it. Okay. Then if you have any div errors is basically when you are trying to divide something by 0. So something by 0 is actually not possible. So that will lead to a div error. Then any of the circular references. So circular references basically contains a reference to the cell for that formula lives in. For example, like let's say put a plus 1 in a cell or a1, or else putting some a1 to b1. Like these type of references leads to a circular reference wherein the formula lives in it. So basically there is already a formula existing in that, and then you're again applying the formula with the same cell and the same reference. So that will lead to a circular reference basically. Then harshane, this will be a very frequent error. This error you will see whenever you apply any formula like in VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, or maybe index match. Then you will see these errors very frequently. Okay. Then we have referential errors, like most common errors messages that you see when you fiddle with the worksheet, like hash ref. When there is like you were writing a formula and sometimes the formula has not been correct, then it will be hash ref, or you will get a hash ref exclamation error when one of the formula parameters pointing to any invalid ranges. So that range which doesn't agree or that range which doesn't have the data. So that will lead to a hash ref error. Okay. Then there are some formulas that needs to be created. Formulas that perform calculations, which returns the information, manipulate the contents to other cells, test conditions, and more. That is called as creating a formula. The formula starts with an equal to. So every time, whenever you are writing any formula in Excel, you always remember, in fact, when we were doing those sum, power, averages, all these formulas, when we were doing, then you can see that you can easily see that there is a sum that you are getting the syntaxes basically, and you will always have to use equals to sum, and then only your formula starts it. So that is called as the sum formula. So individually, you have to provide a cell reference to that. So cell reference in Excel is basically where you want to look up for the formula for, like for which cell you want to refer it, for which cell you want to make it a part. Now, reference cell. Reference of a cell. Now, references are also of two types in Excel. There is one reference, which is a relative reference, which automatically changes as you copy down across the rows or down the columns. So that is called as relative references. Absolute references are when you make your references fixed, means they do not change when you copy a formula. For example, you will have $sign attached to the row as well as the column. So that is called as a absolute reference. So we generally, whenever we are applying for any formulas like VLOOKUP, HLOOKUP, index match or something, we always try to make the lookup table or the lookup array as an absolute reference rather than keeping it as relative reference. The reason behind is that if we keep it as a relative reference and as soon as I drag the formula down, then in that case, the formula is not going to overpower completely. It will be showing as an error or throwing me an error. Okay. Then there are some functions that are present in Excel like sum, average, SUMIF, count. You have COUNTIF, you have IF. So these are some of the functions that are basically available. And these functions basically are the functions which helps in the formatting of the cell, or maybe the formatting of the formatting of the cell, maybe in the functioning of the cell, for all of these stuffs. So for that purposes, basically these functions in the cells exist. Okay. Now let's move to some of the Excel formulas. Let me just delete the sheet. And let's move to some of the other formulas that we have in Excel. So the first formula that we have in Excel that are some of the advanced Excel parts are VLOOKUP. Now, what is a VLOOKUP? VLOOKUP is something whenever I am going to look for a formula by using a array functions for that purpose. That is called as a VLOOKUP in Excel. So generally, the definition of VLOOKUP to find the data in a table of row or a table range by rows. That is called as a VLOOKUP for us. Okay. That is called as a VLOOKUP. Now, how do we apply this VLOOKUP? It's very simple. Let's say this is my table where I have first name, last name, department, city, and date hired. Okay. Now let's suppose for the first name, which is Stuart, I want to get the basically the name. Basically, I want to get the first name of the users. So like the way we have steward. So I want to see what is the next name that we can get. So from JSON. And accordingly, like for steward and JSON, they have the first name. I want to get their departments across. How I can see the departments. So basically, you can have a VLOOKUP. So lookup value in this case will be your steward, because based on this, you want to look up the data, whatever you want to get from. Then your table array will be this to this. And here, oh, my bad. So steward will be your lookup array, then you will have a comma. And then for the table array, you will select this, which will be, and you are going to use an absolute referencing. So here I freezed it so that my data doesn't move when I just move across the cell, as in when I just drag my formula to the rows. Then for the column index, basically, I am going to use the column index number. So column index number, so as I want to find out the department against it, so my department is column C, which is 3. So I'll put it as 3, and then here I will say it as false, and false means it's an exact match, and it will give me an exact match. So what happened? Okay, my range was not correct. So see, I told you there's hash any that comes up. So that means you need to mend your this range. So I can correct that up by using this. Right now. See, now I got this. So now if I'm going to drag this over here for Jensen, I just simply select that and I press Ctrl R, so I'll get operations. So that's the reason for freezing the cell, so that whenever I just drag the formula from here to some other point, then that doesn't like move the data, or maybe don't trim the data in any which way. Like that is the scenario basically. Okay. Then we have HLOOKUP. So HLOOKUP is basically the horizontal lookup when you want to compare a values located in a row across the top of the table of a data, and you wanted to look down a specific number of rows, then you basically use a HLOOKUP. So HLOOKUP and VLOOKUP are majorly compared. So VLOOKUP is when you compare the values are located in column to the left of the data, and HLOOKUP is when you stands for a horizontal lookup. So VLOOKUP means a vertical lookup, and HLOOKUP generally means a horizontal lookup. When I want to deal with the data in a horizontal way, then it's a horizontal lookup, else it's a vertical lookup. So let's say for this, I want to apply a HLOOKUP, that for my first name, I'm getting my cities. So this is the city I'm getting for. So how can I apply that? HLOOKUP. Now my lookup value will be this. My table array will be this. I'll freeze it. And then now this time it's not column index, but it's row index, because I'm moving horizontally. So my row is this time 4th, because I want to get the city. And I want to get an exact match. So this is how I got the data. So this is called as the HLOOKUP in this case. Okay. Now, let's see the if formula. But before going to the if formula, let's see one more scenario. So if you remember previously, I told you about the name manager. Now, how can I generate that name manager? In this case, let's say I want to look for the department of these people, Jason and Lucky. Let's say I want to see for the department. How can I do it? By using a name manager. See, first of all, I have to create a name manager. So I told you that either you can just simply go to the formulas and you can create a name manager over here. So I'll go to a new name manager. Here, I'll just select this. And I'll click on OK. So this name manager lookup is created. Now I will apply a HLOOKUP. I will take the lookup value on base of name. Now, instead of using this time selecting the table, I will follow for the name manager. What was my name manager? This HLOOKUP name manager. Now my row would be third because I'm going to see for the department, and my match will be in second. So see, by using a name manager, it's become easy. So you can give the name manager range to a dynamic range as well, wherein you can use the last column of your data set, so that whenever a new entry comes up, you don't have to literally update your VLOOKUP or HLOOKUP. You can just simply use a name manager and it will automatically update. Like if there is any new data entry in your data set, it will not, it will help you to make it more dynamic. Okay. Now, let's go to the if formula. So if formula is basically based on the criteria of the formula. If formula basically is a criteria based formula. So for example, let's say in case of if formula, let's say if you want to have a formula wherein you want to apply like, okay, if my value is greater than 4, then it should be greater than 4 value, or if my value is less than 4, then it should be less than 4 value, like that way. If you want to have these formulas available, or if you want to work with these type of formulas, then we use a if formula in that case. Now, how it is done? Let's suppose if I'll say if O2 is greater than 5, then it should be yes. Else, if it should be yes, 4 is greater, else it should be no. So O2 means my this value. So that means I said that my this value is greater than 5, then it should be yes, it is greater than 5, else it should be no. That's how it's supposed to show me. Similarly for this one also. If O3 is greater than 5, then yes, greater than 4, and else it is no. So this is how we are going to see for the different types of formulas and see for the different types of entries in the data set basically. So this is how we can work for it. Okay. So if is basically based on the conditions that you provide and that you work for. Okay. Now, coming on to the next, which is an index match formula that we all have. An index match formula is a very, very important formula that we have in a database or in a data cases. So index match formula basically helps you with an index matching of the data set. So whenever you match or do an indexing of the data set, then you get this index match formula available. Now, how you basically do that? Let's say I have this data set wherein basically you have to apply this index match formula over here. Now index match, index match formula is basically basically how we use it. Index matching is based on the array of the data set. Okay, so whatever arrays you have or whatever data you have, basically basically that helps you with the index matching, because it is a best combination wherein you can have the syntax of both the array columns. So you don't have to use a complete table array in case of index matching, basically, because in case of index and match, you are separately using two columns. for the referencing and for the for your lookup values. So that's why we work on a column and not on the complete table. Okay, so how they work? For example, for the first name, I want to pick up the city. Also, for this, yeah, I want to pick up this. For the first name, I want to pick up the city. So how can I basically do that? Okay, let's see. How can we do that? I'll first take index. Now, index gives me this. So in the index, first of all, I'll take the column for the city, the values of the city in this column. I'll do an absolute referencing. Now I'll take match. My VLOOKUP value is this. And for me, the lookup value will be this time name. I'll do an absolute reference and the match type is exact. And I'll enter and voila, I'll have the city name against it. So basically, if you see in this, we are not using a complete table. We are basically matching it on the basis of the row. So as I want to pick up on a lookup for the city, I want to get the value of the city based on the name. So what I did on the first indexing, I took all the values or all the column of the city. And in the next one, I took all the values of the name. Now VLOOKUP and index matching is kind of same. Okay, but the thing is there are a huge difference. Like instead of using a VLOOKUP, we always prefer to use an index match. There are reasons behind it. What are the reasons? The first reason is that it has a dynamic column reference. Now, what do you understand by a dynamic column reference? Basically, what happens in your VLOOKUP, it requires a static column reference. For example, you have to provide a column reference that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So like that way. So that needs a column reference basically. That's why it is a that's why it is not a dynamic column reference. You have to manually enter that. Whereas in case of your index match, that is not a dynamic column reference that you get for. You basically get the you don't get a dynamic column you get a dynamic column reference over here in the index match case, right? So in case of index match, as you have the requires a dynamic column reference, so you have that dynamic column reference. You are not manually entering it because here we are using an array. So that's why it is providing me a dynamic column reference in any which ways. Okay. So as you are using a static reference or adding a new column to your table, it breaks the VLOOKUP formula. Whereas in index match, it will allow you to click those columns which you want to pull the value from. So basically, you will only use those columns from where you require your value. That's it. So that's the main difference. For example, let's say if for the product ID, I want to find the price. So obviously, I'll use the product ID column and the price. I'm not bothered with the other data or other columns in the data set, right? So that's the major reason. Then in VLOOKUP, you have to be very safe with insertion or deletion of the column. Because as you have a static reference, so as soon as you delete a column or you may delete a row, then in that way, your formula will break. Okay, each time you add or delete a new, or add a new column, your formula breaks. So you can manually set the formula to refer a correct column. So you have to every time manually set up that. But in case of our index match, you don't have a dynamic column reference. So that's why that problem gets saved because you are only dealing with those columns which you require for putting up the data through. So that's why there is no distortion in the array or there's no distortion in the data set. So that's the reason that it is mostly used. Then lookup value size limit. So there is a size limit for a lookup value. So you can't exceed a size limit of 255 for a lookup value. If you exceed that size, it will give you a hash value error. So if the value of the lookup is basically 255 characters, then it will give you a hash value error. But in case of index match, you can have a value greater than 255 as well. So that is also one of the things that you can look up value, and you can look up the size limit of that data. Then higher processing speed. So higher processing speed is why? Because in VLOOKUP, index match will have a negligible table array, because we are only dealing with one single column. So obviously this has a negligible table array. It will have a very small or a negligible table array. But if your worksheet contain a lot of rows and formula, index match will work faster and VLOOKUP will work slow, because VLOOKUP actually compares with the complete table. So that's why it becomes slow. Whereas index match doesn't become slow because it doesn't compare with the complete data set, or because it is dealing only with the rows. Because in that case, VLOOKUP has to deal with the complete table, and index match in this case will have to deal only with the columns rather than the entire table array that it could consider for. Then the next thing is it has a lookup value position. So VLOOKUP will only work if there is a lookup value position in the first column. So let's say if I would like to see for the first name, or like for with respect to name, I want to find out the departments or city, I would get the value using a VLOOKUP. But if let's suppose based on the department, I would want to see what persons works in which department, then VLOOKUP will not work. So basically VLOOKUP doesn't work on the negative scale of the data. Will always work on the positive scale of the data. That's also a very huge difference and a very huge issue. So it whereas VLOOKUP cannot move from the left. However, in case of index match, it solves the problem as it performs the lookup both horizontally and vertically as well. So it does not require the lookup value to be in the first column itself. Whenever it wants and wherever it wants, so it will work with that column, and it will be in each and every section of the data. So that's how it basically works, and that's how it basically looks. And these are basically the 5 differences for which we say that yes, VLOOKUP is much more better option than using a lookup than using your other lookups as well. So that is also one of the reasons of using an index match instead of a VLOOKUP. Okay. So these are some of the things that we can use. So obviously, we should always use basically we should always use a index match if we want to find out anything, rather than using a VLOOKUP in any which ways. Okay. Now, coming on to the SUMIF formulas. Now, the SUMIF formulas are basically a sum with an if condition. So, sum of the formula, summing a column with some if conditions, that is called as SUMIF. Okay, SUMIF in Excel simply. So basically, when you have any criteria to apply for that, if I am doing a sum of something, I want to have a criteria also for that fixed. So based on that criteria, my sum should come. So then in that case, you have a SUMIF formula. So you apply it on one range and the sum corresponds to the value in the different range. Okay. Now, let's see how we do it. Basically, this is the data. Now for the graphs, I want to have the sum of the how many total number of total number of animals are there for the graph, or the total numbers are there for the particular graph. How can I do that? Basically, I'm going to do a SUMIF over here. Now, herein I'm going to basically write for a SUMIF formula, wherein based on the criteria that I want to put a criteria for the graphs, I would be looking for my sum. Now, how and what all the criteria is, Let's say I took SUMIF. So first is range. So my range would be this one. The type, I'm going to give an absolute value. Then my criteria, that is grass. And then finally the sum range. The sum range is this one. From here, I want to get the value and I'll see. So see, it gives me the data. Okay. So basically you are getting the sum on the basis of the grass. So if you check that for the grass, what is the sum? So that comes to 1248, which is correct. Similarly for water, if you want to check, that's come as 1249. Then your next formula is, now there is one more formula, which is sum ifs. Sum ifs is when you have more than one criteria to look for. Then we go ahead with sum ifs function. Like we have multiple criteria. Then we go ahead with the with this function of wherein we will get the total of like the way. So for example, if we talk about SUMIF, so it's the sum range first. So the sum range would be this one. Reach that. Criteria range 1. So let's say my criteria range 1 would be on the basis of name. And my criteria would be for, let's say, chameleon. And then my next criteria range would be, sorry, my bad. So my criteria range first was for this, and it should be actually fire. Then the second criteria range would be on this, which will be named. Just a second, I'm writing something down. Let's create it one more time. Let's say sum ifs. So for this, I'm looking at sum. Then my criteria range 1 is this one. And I would say the criteria is fire. Then my second criteria range is on the basis of name. And that is for so you should be very careful with the names, whatever names you have provided, accordingly you have to give that. So what I have given is that I want to find the sum based on that the type should be fire and my name should be Charmander. So then in that case, I get the value like this way. So sum is like when you have multiple criteria to go for, then it will always be sum ifs. Okay. In that case, you will use a sum ifs for that purpose. Similarly, we have COUNTIF. So COUNTIF is when you are counting some of the data based on your let's say COUNTIF, you are counting some of the things based on any criteria. So then in that case, you will have COUNTIF. Like based on a criteria, you are doing a counting of the numbers. Let's say in this case, where I am doing a count based on grass, water, electricity, what is the count for it? So how basically I can do that? I can just simply count on the basis of the criteria and here whatever the count value I want to give for. So if you go to COUNTIF, I want to first give the range. So my range would be here. The type, I'll make it an absolute distance and then my criteria, that's this. So I'll get this. Now, in this also we have COUNTIFs, where you have multiple criteria range. So let's say my first criteria range is this one only. Then my criteria would be this, or maybe I just manually type like grass. And then I have a criteria range too, which is this. And here I want to say see for or maybe not grass. Let's take it for something else, maybe normal. And let's take it as Ratata and close it. So you have 0. Now maybe I made a spelling mistake in any of that. That's why it's giving me 0. Why? Because for this range of normal and for Ratata, I don't have any counts available. That's why it gave me a 0 for that in that case. Okay. Or maybe for that reason, I got 0 because for Ratata, I don't have any entries available. Now, the next thing is count A. Now, count A formula helps you to count basically that how many, basically in the count A, what you get to know is you basically get to know that how many cells in the range is not empty. Cell in the range is not at all empty. Okay, that is called as a count function, count A function. How many cells are not empty? So let's say in this case, if I am looking for a set of range wherein I would see for this set, let's say for this one, I want to see my bad count A. And I want to see for this one. So it will show me 12. Now if you see this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 cells are basically empty. There were 20. So that's why these are there. So if you see for the count of entries in the data set, you will find it 12 only. Okay, the count is 12. So for which the data is like available and the data is there. Okay, so for that reason, we use count A in that cases. Okay, so count A is basically, it will tell you how many columns are available. Then you have a formula of count blank. How many columns are basically blank in your data set? Like in this way, if you want to count how many columns are blank, like let's say in this one, let's say count blank. So for this range, if I need to find out a count blank, it will be 0 because there are no blanks. So obviously, you will not get the blanks in any which ways. Okay, but in other cases where you can see blanks, like in this one, this column, so I'll have 8 blanks in a normal way. Now there is a function of ifs as well, multiple ifs, like a nested if formula, wherein you can have multiple conditions. Like in this case, where I have name, type, and speed. And I want to divide them on the basis of the speed. I want to divide them if the speed is slow, if the speed is normal, or if the speed is faster. So I said, if my value will be greater than 90, then it is faster. If my value is greater than 50, then it will be a normal speed. And if it is less than equal to 50, that means it is slow. Okay, so there accordingly, I put that and I got a value for that, wherein I would see either it is a slow normal or faster speed. So multiple if conditions, you can have a nested if. Right now, in the new versions of Excel, you will not use the nested if. Instead, you have ifs there. So ifs and nested if, like again and again, writing the if statement, because if contains of two conditions, wherein if your criteria, like whatever the column reference you want to choose for, and then you have to put on the criteria that okay, for greater than or less than, you need to use it or not use it for that purpose. So then in that case, instead of using for the false section, you can again write an if and use the formula for it. But in the new versions of Microsoft Excel, you will basically observe or basically see that they have multiple, instead of that if like I'm writing over here, you will have ifs. So that has been replaced. That has been a new versions update that you will have ifs. So if is a normal venture of your multiple, like the multiple ifs, or I can say that it's a form of a nested ifs where you can have multiple criteria, and based on that you can categorize. Like for example, in a class, if I have marks of students, so whosoever has a marks in the range of 100, marks between 100 to let's say 90, then they will be given as excellent. Students who have marks between 90, say 85 to let's suppose 70, they will have they will mark as like good. Okay, then from let's say 60 to 55, they will mark as an above average, and below 50, they will be marked as an poor, or like an average student. We can mark that up. Okay, and which are below than that also, or if somebody scores a 0, then that's a fail condition. So like in a case or in a scenario where you have multiple situations or multiple criteria to work through, or multiple criteria to see through, then in that case we use ifs a lot. Multiple ifs for explaining that condition, for providing that condition, for doing that stuff. Okay, so these are some of the information of the formulas that are there in Excel. So basically, Excel has a huge lot of formulas that are available, and there is no data that is okay. You can complete it in a way, because Excel itself is a very huge sort of a thing and a huge way. So basically, that's why there are a lot of formulas that are there, and we can't really cover them up like in a way. But yes, obviously, when you talk about formulas, when you talk about this work, when you talk about everything, you should always remember that formulas never comes in 1 day or 2 days. You have to constantly revise those, you have to constantly practice those. Then only these formulas becomes much more clear. And you will get to know, okay, where I want to use this formula, where I want to use this formula, and you will get all these pictures clear in your mind. So that's how the formula section works, and that's how the formula works. Okay.